Welcome to the Deep Dive. We dig into the document so you don't have to. And today, we're looking at something huge, an economic shift in the U.S. that just, well, it changed everything almost overnight, it seemed.
It really did. The first half of 2025 wasn't just, tweaking trade policy. It felt like a complete U-turn back towards protectionism, and it sent shockwaves globally right away.
And the scale is just, it's almost hard to grasp. Our sources are showing the average applied U.S. tariff rate jumped from, about 2.5% in January 2025?
Yeah, historically very low.
To an estimated 27% by April. 27%.
It's staggering. I mean, context matters here. You basically have to go back over a century to 1909, the Payne-Aldrich Act, to see the U.S. with such high tariffs across the board. It's like 100 years of trade policy reversed in, 4 months?
Wild. So, okay, our mission today, let's unpack the sources. We need to understand how these mechanisms, especially the national emergency angle.
Right.
Then look at the cost here at home, the trade fights it picked around the world, and this massive legal battle that's brewing, heading to the Supreme Court. Basically, is any of this actually legal?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
Okay, let's start with the rationale.
Right.
Why did the administration say they were doing this huge, sudden shift?
Well, they laid out 3 main pillars, basically. First, push domestic manufacturing, bring jobs back. Second, protect national security, a common theme.
Okay.
And third, this was the really ambitious one, raise so much money from tariffs that they could potentially replace income taxes for people earning under $200,000 a year.
Wow. Replacing income tax with tariffs, I mean, that sounds pretty radical. And it hinges on this idea that trade deficits are just fundamentally bad, right?
It does. And, almost immediately, economists across the board push back hard on that. There's this persistent misunderstanding or maybe misrepresentation that foreign countries pay the tariffs.
Yeah, the sources we looked at were really clear on that point. Who actually pays?
Exactly. The cost lands squarely on the American businesses importing the goods. Think your retailers, your manufacturers. And almost always, that cost gets passed right down the chain to you, the consumer. It's essentially a tax on buying things.
But financially, I mean, it did bring in more revenue for the government, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. By July 2025, tariffs accounted for about 5% of federal revenue. That's up significantly from the usual 2% or so. But that success, if you want to call it that, seemed to fuel even broader action later in the year.
Right, because by September, it wasn't just steel and aluminum anymore. They announced new targets effective October 1st, and it showed just how wide this net was being cast.
Yeah, moving far beyond basic commodities.
Like a 100% duty on brand name and patented drugs. Unless, and this is big, unless the company could prove they were literally breaking ground on a U.S. factory.
Right, breaking ground or under construction. Very specific, very conditional. And it hit home goods too. Kitchen cabinets, bathroom vanities, boom, 50% tariff.
50%. Upholstered furniture, 30%. Even heavy-duty trucks got hit with 25%, all under this banner of, boosting U.S. production or fighting supposed unfair practices.
It was incredibly broad.
So how do they manage this legally? I mean, normally trade deals and tariffs take ages, lots of congressional back and forth. Our sources point to 2, let's say, controversial legal tools they leaned on heavily.
The first one is probably more familiar. Section 232 of that 1962 Trade Expansion Act. It lets the president curb trade if there's a national security reason.
Okay, and we saw that used for big hikes on basics, right? Steel and aluminum tariffs doubled to 50% in June 25. But it also got stretched. I mean, national security justifications for home appliances, refrigerators, dishwashers, and a 50% tariff on copper, too.
Yeah, the national security argument got applied pretty creatively, you could say. But interestingly, with copper, they almost immediately had to backtrack a bit.
How so?
Well, they realized hitting all copper imports could cripple U.S. manufacturing that needs raw copper. So they carved out an exemption for the basic input, cathode copper. That was a huge deal, especially for Chile, which supplies a lot of it to the U.S. It showed they had to kind of adjust on the fly to avoid completely breaking supply chains.
Okay, so that's Section 232. But the real game changer, the legal engine behind most of this, was something called IEEPA.
Right, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. This was the key. It basically allowed the administration to sidestep a lot of the usual trade law hoops by declaring national emergencies.
Emergencies related to what?
All sorts of things. Fentanyl trafficking, border security, and this was the really contentious one, just the existence of trade deficits themselves, declaring a trade deficit an emergency.
Wow. And that act, IEEPA, was the basis for what they called Liberation Day. April 2nd, 2025.
Exactly. That's when they dropped the reciprocal tariff policy. Just like that, a minimum 10% tariff on almost everything coming in from countries that weren't already under sanctions. The scope was just immense overnight.
And they had this formula, right, to calculate the specific tariff for each country. Sounded very technical.
It did sound technical, calculated as half the result of dividing a country's trade deficit with the U.S. by the value of its exports to the U.S., but
It sounds almost too neat. Did they just kind of invent a math justification?
that's pretty much what the critics said, yeah. The USTR reports cited economists who then publicly complained, saying, hey, the White House twisted our research, they applied it wrong, it looked like they had the policy goal first, and then reverse engineered a formula to fit it.
The statistical fig leaf, maybe?
Something like that.
And then there was one more big move under IEPA hitting e-commerce, the de minimis exemption getting axed.
Right, August 29th, 2025. That ended the rule allowing packages under $800 to come into the U.S. duty-free. That was a direct hit, especially for, those big Chinese e-commerce giants like Shan and Temu who ship tons of small, cheap packages directly to American shoppers.
Okay, so the policy framework is set. Let's pivot from the how to the what happened next, the immediate fallout. Yeah. Wall Street, Main Street. April 2nd must have been quite a day. Was that the first big sort of moment?
Oh, absolutely. The market reaction was instant, and it was panic, pure panic. We saw what's now called the 2025 stock market crash. The S&P 500 plunged nearly 5% that day.
And NASDAQ.
NASDAQ got hammered even worse, down almost 6%. That was its biggest single-day point loss ever recorded.
That kind of drop must have forced their hand a bit, right? Did they stick to the plan fully?
They couldn't. The volatility was just too extreme. They were forced to announce a 90-day pause on applying those higher country-specific reciprocal tariffs for most nations. They kept the pressure on China, but for everyone else, they had to hit pause. The markets just couldn't take that level of shock all at once.
A forced pause. But the real story, the one that hits home for everyone listening, is the cost to regular households. Let's get to that Yale Budget Lab number. That feels like the core takeaway here.
It's absolutely critical. Their calculations showed that all these 2025 tariffs, taken together, effectively amounted to an average loss of $3,800 per U.S. household per year.
$3,800. That's not just noise. That's a significant chunk out of a family's budget.
It's huge, and you could see it reflected in prices for specific things people buy. Clothing, apparel prices, up 17% because of the combined tariffs.
Wow. And cars.
Motor vehicles jumped 8.4%, which on an average new car adds about $4,000 to the sticker price.
Ouch. And who bears the brunt of this? Is it spread evenly?
No, and that's a key finding. It's regressive. The data clearly showed the burden hit lower-income households much harder. Someone in the second income decile faced a cost that was like 2.5 times greater relative to their income than someone in the top decile.
So it hits those with the least disposable income the hardest?
Precisely. They have less cushion to absorb those price hikes.
And the job market. Did it feel the strain too?
It did start to show. The Fed revised GDP growth projections downward. The CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, estimated the unemployment rate could climb towards 4.7%, maybe higher, by the end of 25. And we saw manufacturing, the very sector supposedly being helped, actually shed 14,000 jobs in May and June combined.
Oof. What about farming? Agriculture seems particularly vulnerable to trade wars.
Absolutely devastated in some areas. China, a massive buyer, retaliated by just stopping purchases of U.S. soybeans. That put farmers in an immediate terrible bind. Suddenly, no buyer for their crop, storage facilities overflowing, huge financial pressure right across the farm belt.
So domestic pain was clear. What about internationally? How did other countries react beyond just market panic? Let's start close to home, Canada and Mexico.
Right. North America got complicated fast. There were initial tariffs threatened against Canada and Mexico, tied to other issues like immigration and fentanyl. But the really crucial part, they managed to largely shield the auto industry.
How?
By indefinitely delaying the tariffs on goods that complied with the USMCA trade deal rules. Since the North American auto supply chain is so deeply integrated that USMCA compliance basically saved it from total chaos. Many other products got hit, but the core auto sector survived, relatively speaking.
Okay, so some stability there eventually. But then you had some really strained situations, like with Brazil. The U.S. actually has a trade surplus with Brazil, but they still got hit with tariffs.
Yeah, that one was a head-scratcher from a purely economic standpoint, and it escalated dramatically. At one point, the administration was threatening a massive 50% tariff on Brazilian goods and explicitly linking it to whether Brazil prosecuted its former president, Jair Bolsonaro.
Wait, linking tariffs to another country's internal criminal justice decisions?
Exactly. Tying trade policy directly to influencing another sovereign nation's legal affairs. It was extraordinary.
But did they follow through? Because there's this acronym that came out of it.
Ah, right. No, they didn't fully follow through. Late in the process, major Brazilian exports, things like airplanes from Embraer, iron ore, natural gas, they were suddenly exempted from the harshest tariffs.
And that led to
That led to people in Brazil, somewhat cynically, coining the acronym TACO,
taco?
for Trump always chickens out.
Yeah.
It reflected this view that the administration made big threats but then sometimes blinked or settled for less when faced with major disruption or pushback. A fascinating little piece of diplomatic shorthand.
Incredible. Okay, what about further afield? India. There was something called a secondary tariff.
Yes, this was another really significant development. First, India got hit with a 25% reciprocal tariff, like many others, but then the U.S. added another 25% on top a secondary tariff, making it 50% total as a penalty.
A penalty for what?
For India continuing to buy Russian oil, defying U.S. pressure related to the war in Ukraine.
That sounds like it would cause major friction with a pretty important partner.
It did. Sources show even within the U.S. government, officials and analysts were highly critical. They argued it was a strategic blunder, damaging ties with India, a key player needed to counterbalance China over energy purchases. It risked pushing India closer to other blocs, like BRICS.
Meanwhile, how did Europe handle this? They're a huge trading partner.
Europe stared down some massive threats initially. The U.S. floated tariffs as high as 50% on European goods. The EU, in response, threatened huge retaliation, like up to 100 billion euros worth of tariffs on U.S. products.
So did it escalate to that level?
Thankfully, no. It seemed cooler heads prevailed, or at least a compromise was reached. After intense negotiation, they landed on a deal that set the minimum tariff rate on most EU goods at 15%. Still a significant barrier compared to before, but not the trade war catastrophe that was threatened. It was more of a managed conflict.
Okay, so all these tariffs, these global spats, especially the ones pushed through using IEPA and these emergency declarations, it all funnels into this massive legal fight, doesn't it? About presidential power itself.
That's the crux of it now. The fundamental legal question is, did the president overstep his constitutional authority? Did using these emergency powers, especially IEPA, to impose tariffs effectively mean the executive branch was levying taxes, something the Constitution reserves primarily for Congress? Trade lawyers argue Congress only delegates that power very narrowly.
So where do things stand legally right now? Are these tariffs technically still in place?
Yes, they are. And this is key. Lower federal courts have actually ruled that the tariffs imposed under IEPA are illegal, that they did exceed presidential authority. However,
But they're still being collected.
exactly, they remain in effect while the government appeals those rulings. So the entire structure, billions of dollars in tariffs, hangs in the balance. It's all heading for a showdown at the Supreme Court.
And there's a specific case to watch.
There is. Learning Resources v. Trump. It's scheduled for arguments in November 2025. That case is expected to be the decisive one on the legality of using IEPA this way for tariffs.
Did Congress try to push back at all on these emergency declarations?
There were attempts. Under the National Emergencies Act, Congress actually has a mechanism, these privileged resolutions, to try and terminate a declared emergency. Democrats and some Republicans tried to use it.
Right.
But those efforts were blocked, primarily by the Republican majority in Congress at the time. Our sources specifically mention a key moment where Senator J.D. Vance cast a deciding tie-breaking vote in the Senate to keep the emergency declaration underpinning those Liberation Day tariffs in place.
So the congressional check didn't quite work as intended there? Okay, let's zoom out. What's the big picture takeaway from this whole whirlwind of policy?
I mean, the scale and speed are just unprecedented in modern times. A lightning-fast return to high tariffs, something the U.S. hadn't seen in over a century. It immediately shocked global markets, tangled up alliances, and as we saw, acted like a big regressive tax hike on Americans.
Right. It feels like the core tension is this. A president claiming broad power through these national emergency declarations, even for something like a trade deficit, clashing head-on with decades of economic thinking and, frankly, with the data showing it made the economy smaller and cost you, the listener, thousands each year.
Exactly. But the truly profound question looking ahead is about that executive power. If the Supreme Court, in Learning Resources, says, yes, using IEPA this way, based on these broad emergency definitions, is legal, Well, that fundamentally changes the game.
How so?
It could potentially give future presidents a powerful unilateral tool. Imagine declaring a national emergency over, say, climate change or income inequality or any major economic issue, and then using that declaration to impose sweeping tariffs or other economic sanctions without needing explicit, detailed approval from Congress for that specific action.
That's the final thought to leave people with then. The outcome of that Supreme Court case this November isn't just about these tariffs. It's about the future balance of power in making trade policy and maybe much more. Definitely one to watch.